Hey there, and welcome to our chapter on tools and techniques. Now, there are a lot of different ways to get things done in Photoshop, so I just want to make sure that you're aware of basically all the tools that you have at your disposal. That doesn't mean you have to use all of these things, but we want to make sure you know them, so if something's not working for you, you can choose another tool for the job. Now, most of what we're going to be working with are known as adjustment layers, and these are super cool. They're really great because they're non-destructive, meaning they're not going to destroy anything that's going on in your image. And they do that by creating their own layer that you can turn off and on at any time, making it visible or invisible. You can change the opacity, you can change the values of things. For instance, if you made an adjustment layer that made your whole image blue, you could turn that off or on at any time, or you could lower the opacity, making it less blue. So adjustment layers are super, super handy. There are a bunch of adjustment layers out there, and we're going to show you basically all of them on how to change color. And I'm going to show you which tools you want to use in different situations. Some tools are better for subtle adjustments, especially for skin tone. Other tools are better for super extreme color adjustments. So just want to make sure you guys know all the tools and techniques. So we're going to start off with levels. Now, levels are super cool because you can use them. They're incredibly powerful. You can use them to lighten and darken your image. You can also use them to add interesting color styles to your photos, and you can also use them to color correct photos. Levels are really, really great. They go hand in hand with curves, which we're going to cover in the next video. So let's go ahead and jump in and show you guys levels. Here in our sample images folder, we've got our tools and techniques, and right inside of there, we've got levels.jpg. So let's go ahead and open it up. I'm gonna hit F for full screen, and you're gonna see as we start, we've got quite a bit of a color cast going on. There's a lot of orange going on in this photo. So let's go ahead and make a levels adjustment layer and see what we can do with it. So let's go to layer, down to new adjustment layer, and over to levels. Okay, we're gonna hit OK there, and here we have our levels adjustment layer. It's in the properties window, so let's just pull that out over here, and I'm gonna make it bigger so we can see what we're doing. Okay, now, you'll notice when I created an adjustment layer, here's our adjustment layer properties, it made a layer here in my layers panel. So if you don't see your layers panel, or for instance, if you don't see any of these panels, you can just go to window and then make sure you have those checked. So I've got my layers checked and my properties is checked here because we're seeing the properties right there. Okay, now if I close the properties window, no big deal. You can just double click on any adjustment layer. They all have different symbols, but just double click right there and it'll open up the properties for it again. Okay, so let me just go ahead and crank this. We'll just make it way lighter, okay? Now, adjustment layers, you can turn these off or on at any time. I can lower my opacity, which is nice as well. And the other thing is we can use layer masks. Now, a white layer mask means the layer is going to be totally visible. A black layer mask means it's going to be invisible. And you can paint white or black with a paintbrush on there. You can make selections. It's really cool. So for instance, I'm going to hit B for my brush tool, and I'm going to choose black as my foreground color. Okay, and I'm just going to paint black right over here. Now I'm painting on my layer mask, and what that's doing is just hiding this layer. Okay, so you can see it's hidden where I paint white, where I paint black rather, and I can just go back in and paint white on it, and it's going to be visible there. Okay, so all adjustment layers work the same. They all have layer masks. They all can be made visible and invisible. You can change the opacity of them, and you can even change the blending mode. We can make it like a soft light. Ooh, so nice. All right, well, let's go ahead and just delete this one, and we'll start anew. So a couple ways you can make adjustment layers. You can go to a layer, down to new adjustment layer, and your list is right here, okay? You also have a list here. It looks like a circle, half of it's light, half of it's dark, okay? All of these, really nice. You can see levels right there, that's gonna do it. Or you can go to window and down to adjustments, okay? And then it's gonna pop up this really cool little adjustment window, and you've got your icons there. So here's levels, for instance. I don't have all the icons memorized. You don't have to have them memorized. I actually don't really even use this panel. Most of the time, the way I do it is I go to this little thing right here. Again, it's just a circle, half of it's light, half of it's dark. Click there and pop, go to levels, and you got a levels adjustment layer. That's the way that I do it most of the time, but you can do it however. Okay, so now we got adjustment layers. You guys know how they work. Let's go ahead and show you around levels. So to start off with levels, we got two basic areas that we can change. We got a big histogram up here. Your dark pixels are represented on the left, okay? And your light pixels are represented on the right. You can see we've got a bunch of dark pixels in this image, which makes sense. Matching our image, we've got a bunch of dark pixels. Okay, so this graph on top, it's a histogram, and this is what's known as the input levels. And down here, this little guy is known as the output levels. You can see it written right there. You don't even have to know that stuff, just wanted to tell you. So there are a couple of sliders that you can pull around. So let's go ahead and start with this one. I'm gonna click here and drag this from the left to the right, and you're gonna see my image is getting darker. Not only is it darker, but more of my image is turning pure black. And that's because this is basically the black point, okay? So right now, if I take this right to about here, everything that's to the left of this point becomes completely black. And then everything else gets kind of compressed and compressed, right? Until you go over here and then it's all black. Now on the opposite side, you have your white point. So if I click and drag this from the right to the left, we are getting light, 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 and there we go. Here we are in our white point, and here almost everything is white. Okay, so it just compresses the amount of information. Okay, when you do this, by the way, okay, you can see, you can't see anything out of the window. Basically, those were lighter areas, and I just made them completely white. So technically, we've lost those mountains. They're not visible. Like if I were to save this out as a flattened JPEG, those mountains are gone. We made them white. But this is why we use adjustment layers, because I can just turn this off or on at any time. And when you're saving, I always, always, always recommend saving either a PSD or a TIFF, because those are layered files, and they're gonna have your information. So let me just show you that real quick, just if you're not already doing that, it's a really good practice to save out a couple different versions. So let's say I'm gonna go to File, and let's go down to Save As. I'll just throw these on my desktop, okay? We're gonna save this as levels. Here you have your different formats. So you got Photoshop, you got TIFF, both Photoshop and TIFF. Those are really great, and they both have layers. So let's just do a Photoshop. It's gonna be levels.psd. I'm gonna hit Save. Let's do another layer, file. I'm gonna go to save as, and now I'm just gonna call this, we're gonna make this a JPEG. Now a JPEG is compressed, meaning that there are no layers. You're not gonna get your layers when you save JPEG. So let's hit save there. All right, it's gonna compress it, ask your quality, hit okay. So let's just go ahead and close this down real quick. Now we're not gonna do this with all the adjustment layers. I just wanna make sure we're all on the same page here. So let's go ahead and open up those documents that I just saved. So I'm gonna hit open. Here on our desktop, let's go to levels.jpg and levels.psd. So we'll open both of those. Okay, so we're starting off with our JPEG here. We can see they look the exact same, right? Cool. They look the exact same. This is our JPEG. There are no layers, and everything that I had visible there, it's compressed and it's flattened, okay? It's a small file size, and it's really great for uploading it to the web. But you always want to make sure you save a PSD as well, because that contains a lot more information, and you use that for your own reference. So here's our PSD that we saved, okay? My PSD looks great. Visually, they look the same, but check it out. My layers in the PSD are still intact. So if I send this to my client and they're like, that looks great, except it's way too bright. Can you make it darker? In your level, if you just had a JPEG saved out, no luck, okay? You're not gonna be able to get that back. Even if I run a levels adjustment on that JPEG and try to make it darker, look at that. That information is gone. It's baked in there, okay? Now, your PSD, okay, or a TIFF, they both have layers, contain your layers. So look at this. I can get back at any time, or I can just double click on my levels adjustment layer and change those values. Okay, so this is why we use adjustment layers, because you can change them at any time, even after you save your files, and you can turn them off and on. They give you a huge amount of flexibility, and you can always come back 10 years from now, open up this PSD, and you can still make your adjustments. So I think it's huge because, especially for my first few years of editing, like 3-4 years of photo editing, I overdid stuff all the time. I still kind of do it. You'll brighten something and it's like, that looks great, and then a year later you're like, what was I thinking? If you save out your PSDs, you can always go back in there and change those values. You don't have to start from scratch. You just change your little adjustment layers and you're good to go. That's why I wanted to just go over that. Now, let's go ahead. We don't need to save any of that stuff. That was all just to make sure that we're working in a non-destructive manner. Okay, now let's jump back into levels. So we're back to our original image. Again, we'll go to our adjustment layer. We're gonna go up to levels. There we go. And we've already taken a look at our black point. We've taken a look at our white point. And here in the middle, we have our midpoint. So you can make your image towards black or towards light, light or dark. But you can see that my white point and my black point stay the same. So most of the time, if you want to make your images lighter or darker using levels, you want to use this mid-tone slider, okay? You want to use this slider here in the middle. These on the right and the left, these will tend to clip information. They'll make you lose information in your photos. So most of the time you want to use the center slider. Okay, so these are input levels here. Notice I've got to take my black point and bring it up. It makes everything black. Now my output levels here on the bottom, let's grab this guy and bring this from the left to the right. You can see what this is doing is it's taking the darkest pixel in my image here, and instead of being black, now it's gonna be gray. Okay, on the other side, it's taking the lightest pixel in my image, and instead of being white, it's gonna be gray. So you can darken that down. So very interesting, they kind of do two different things, and you can use them in conjunction. For instance, if I wanted to take my black point and just bring that way up to about there, so we're cutting off a lot of information, but I don't want it to actually be black, I'd like it to be more of the gray side. I can take this and bring it up there, and look at that, we've got like an interesting dark gray in our shadows, which you've probably seen images that look like this, styled like this quite a bit. You can keep going up if you want to as well, okay? You can do the same thing with your whites, bring that in, and then bring that in. You don't see that as much, you tend to see more of like clip shadows and then output levels being brought up a little bit. So that's basically how levels work. Now, levels are really cool because you can adjust your light and dark, which is what we've been doing, but you can also adjust color, and that's why we're including them in this tutorial. So let's show you guys colors. Here in our color, I'm gonna go to our red channel first. So we were on RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. By now you already know all you need to know about RGB. Now you can break it into your different color channels. So we're gonna start with our red channel. There we go. And in our red channel, you basically see the exact same thing, except when I take my midpoint slider and take this to the right, what it's doing is it's actually reducing the red in my image, okay? And it's pushing it towards cyan, because remember our color wheel, cyan is the opposite of red. Here in our red channel, if I take this and drag this from the left to the right, it's gonna reduce the amount of red, it's gonna push it towards cyan. Now, if I go the other way, it's gonna increase the amount of reds here in my midtone. So we've got some color adjustments here. Now you can do the same thing basically with your black and white point. Okay, so in this point, it's going to like basically reduce the amount of reds. That's anything darker than here, it's gonna reduce the amount of red, which you can see, it's just pushing cyans into my shadows. Here on the right-hand side, it's going to take all this point and reduce the amount of cyan on this side, and it's gonna push red into my highlights. So pretty cool. It does take a little bit of like getting used to, but once you understand what's going on, especially with the color wheel, should help. And we're gonna continue to explain it. Now here in the shadows, I'm gonna take this and go from left to the right, and it's going to put red into my shadows. There we go. So my darkest red pixel, I'm just telling it to be lighter red, basically, and then the opposite in my highlights. So the lightest cyan pixel, I'm telling it to be darker cyan. Okay, let's go to our next color channel, which is our green channel. Let's refer to my best friend, Mr. Color Wheel. We have green, and on the opposite side, we have magenta. So green, if we push this to the left, yep, it's getting more green. And if we go to the right, it's getting more magenta. So these are opposites in the color wheel, and that's how these work. Okay, now same thing. If I pull this, we get magenta in our shadows, green in our highlights, green in the shadows, magenta in the highlights. Okay, there we go. And onto our blue channel. Again, back to our best friend. We have blue and we have yellow. So here in our blue channel, take our midpoint here, drag it to the right. It's going to get more yellow in our midtones. To the left, we got more blue in our midtones. Here this is going to reduce the amount of blues in our shadows, making more yellow in the shadows. This will increase the amount of blues in our highlights, giving more blue in the highlights. This will add some blues into the shadows. There we go. It just lightens up those blue pixels in the shadows, and this will darken the yellow pixels in the highlights. Okay, pretty cool. Now, obviously, if you just want to make your image more magenta, cool, we know how to do that. But there are a lot of other colors going on, right? You've got orange, you got rose, you got azure. So keep in mind, you can combine what's going on in these color channels to change it to literally anything. So for instance, if I wanted it to be, let's go ahead and say, I'm just going to reset this, by the way. I'm going to click on that little reset button that just gets you back to how it was when it started. Let's go to our red channel, okay? And I can push this to the left, which is going to give me more reds. But then if I go to my blue channel and push this to the left and get more blues, now what we're getting, let's see, red and blue, we're getting more magentas. Okay, so I could have gone to the green channel and reduced the amount of green there too. So you can then combine these. If I want to go to the green channel and then now I want to add green, there we go. Now we're getting more yellow. So you can combine these different color channels. Let's just go here and show you how we can combine the different color channels to get literally any color cast on your image. You can see that's basically just a red cast. So you can go in here and play around. And then you can always throw stuff in your shadows. And you really can do quite a bit of color work just using levels on your image. Also, don't forget, you can turn these off or on at any time. You can lower the opacity at any time. You can also use layer masks. So if I had a gradient and I wanted to use a linear gradient right here and a foreground to transparent, which is right here, and then paint with black, I could, for instance, do a gradient like that where it would color just the bottom of the image and it would fade up to the top. So that's basically how levels work. Now, we've gone over the lights and darks, we've gone over the different color channels and combining the different color channels as well. Now, you can totally use levels to help color correct your photo, and that's what we're actually gonna do with this photo. So you'll notice inside of your properties window for your levels, you've got three little eyedroppers here, okay? You've got your black point, let's just hover right over there, it should say. It says sample an image to set the black point, okay? Then we've got our gray point and we've got our white point. So my black point, basically, if I click there and then click in my image, anything that's darker than that, it's gonna go totally black rather. So depending on where I click, everything that's darker than that is just gonna get totally black. Okay, kind of fun. Now let's just reset that there. Our white point, where I click, anything brighter than that is gonna get totally white. Okay, and that's literally pretty much the same thing as just doing this, by the way. All right, now our midpoint, this is actually interesting because this will actually color the image as well. So this is looking for a target gray. Now you may have heard of a gray card. We're gonna talk about that later, but basically if you have like something that should be just gray, like my shirt, for instance, is gray, you can use a neutral gray to help color your image and color correct your image, which is great. So this is gonna grab a neutral gray, and if I click here over there, it's gonna basically try to push that to neutral gray, and you're gonna see it's gonna change the colors of my image. If I click it over there, it's gonna say, oh, that should be neutral gray, and it's gonna change the colors of my image as well. So you can see now, just turn this off or on, this area that I just clicked really does look a lot closer to gray than the rest of the image, doesn't it? Okay, so we're taking that midpoint slider and then basically making it neutral gray. And what that's doing is, see my red channel here, it pushed that mid value way over there. In our green channel, push it just a little bit. And in our blue channel, it pushed it way back there. So pretty interesting. It's actually moving all these sliders around. It's not magic, it's just moving those things around. And we're choosing this as our target gray, which is pretty cool. So we already did a little bit of color correction. Now that does look good, except we're getting some greens here on the left. And it's not exactly bright. So let's do a little bit more color correction using what we know about levels now. I'm gonna grab another levels adjustment layer. You can make as many of these as you want. No one's gonna be mad at you. Let's just make it a little bit brighter using this levels adjustment layer because it got darker when we did our midpoint. But color correction wise, we're looking pretty good. We color corrected quite a bit of that. Now we're also getting quite a bit of a green tint here on the left-hand side of my image, mostly in the shadows, right? So let's see if we can fix that. I'm gonna make another adjustment layer. Again, we're just using levels here. Let's go to our green channel and I'm gonna push this mid-tone slider from left to the right. And you can see it is in fact reducing the amount of greens there on the left, which is great. It's adding a bit too much magenta onto the right side of my image. So I'm just gonna click on my layer mask and just choose a really large soft edge brush. And I'm just gonna paint black on this side of the image, which is just gonna reduce the magenta cast a little bit. All right, and there we go. So you can see now it's just basically correcting the greens on that side of the photo. Now, throughout this tutorial, we're gonna go over a ton of different methods to color correct. This might not be the exact method that I would use every single time, but you can see we just use levels to basically just color correct this photo, which is really, really nice. Still have a little bit of yellows. If we wanna just make the image a little bit more blue, I think that might help too. So let's grab another adjustment layer. I'm gonna go to our levels. We'll go to our blue channel and I'll just push the image a little bit towards blue. There we go. You know what? Maybe in our shadows, let's go a little bit towards blue. And there we go. And that's looking pretty good. All right. Let me just lower that opacity. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn those off and back on. So we really did a good job reducing the majority of that color cast using just levels. Now, in this case, that's a pretty big adjustment, and there are a lot of other tools. So what I would probably do in this case is group all those together. So I've got my levels, Control or Command G to group those, and I'm just gonna lower the opacity a little bit. So we get somewhere like half in between, because I find a lot of time when I do things in Photoshop, I tend to overdo them. So it's a good idea to group things together and just kind of change the opacity of the group and see if it helps out. So let's just turn that off and on, and there we go. We did a really nice job reducing the color cast in that image, and we did it with just using levels. All right, guys, that finishes our section on levels. We also just went over some general adjustment layer guidelines and saving preferences. Be sure to save out that JPEG. You can send that to your client, put it on your website, Instagram, whatever. Also, be sure to save out a PSD or a TIFF. Those are gonna be layered files that you can use for reference and change those at any time. Okay, well, that's it for levels. Next, we're jumping in to curves.